This is Philosophy 3 at Las Positas College. This lecture is about Arthur Schopenhauer, German philosopher who lived from 1788 to 1860. You'll see that Arthur Schopenhauer had a lot in common both with Plato and with Kant. He shared with Plato a skepticism about the nature of the external world and its value. He shared with Kant a lot of his metaphysics about what we can and cannot know, as well as his impression that art should be a disinterested engagement with the world. You remember that for Kant there exists the phenomenal world. The phenomenal world is the world of human experience. The world of human experience is generated into what it is by categories of the mind as well as by space and time. Categories are things like cause and effect and substance and similarity. And for Kant, the thing in itself, or the world outside perception, the world as it exists, when it's not being perceived and not in any way translated into a perceptual experience for rational creatures, the thing in itself, the world in itself, for Kant, it's just a big mystery as to what it is. He claims it must be there to kind of ground the experience that we get when we actually have our perceptual experience. But what is the nature of that thing in itself? Because all of these categories are descriptive of how human beings interpret the world, we can't say that those categories apply to the thing in itself necessarily, because we can only access anything by using those categories. So how does this relate back to Schopenhauer? Schopenhauer ends up making the claim, even though he identifies a lot with Kant, a lot with the idea that these categories are necessary to make sense of the world, he ends up claiming at least that we have a faculty that allows us to sense, as well as our observation of the way everything works in the world, shows that the nature of the thing in itself, what exists outside of us, what grounds every possible experience that we'll have, and everything in the world, is something that he calls the will. So what is the world like? He's going to disagree with Kant that we can't know. We have this awareness of what the world is like in itself, and in itself the world is will. And that will expresses itself through human experience, again still utilizing these categories, space and time and the rest, to manifest a world of desire for us. If this reminds you of something that you might read in the Upanishads or Vedantic philosophy from the Indian tradition, Schopenhauer was very influenced actually by the Upanishads, and at one point says it was something like the sole consolation of his life, clearly influenced by Eastern philosophy, especially the philosophy of India. So we know that the ultimate reality behind everything for Schopenhauer is will or desire. Not necessarily a willing for something, but blind desire that expresses itself, individuating itself into objects of experience. And so for Schopenhauer, when we look at the world, he wrote a book called The World as Will and Representation. Right? So will is just that blind force of desire behind the universe. Representation is just all the ways in which that will is represented in our world of experience as objects that are expressing that same desire. So think about something like a tree reaching up towards the sunlight. Schopenhauer would really think of this as the tree itself almost representing that kind of blind desire behind the universe, being actualized through the form of a tree, and the tree is, through its desire, reaching up towards the heavens. He even talks in one place about planets revolving in the heavens, and talks about the force that moves the planets and holds them in their orbits as this force of desire or a kind of seeking. And when it comes to human behavior, this is even more obvious for Schopenhauer, that as soon as we're born, we have intense desires for love, for food, and we fight with the earth to express our own desires, to achieve what we want. And life itself is this process of having desire, attempting to achieve that desire, and that is just the basic element that makes up experience and makes up the world that we represent to ourselves in this phenomenal or world of our experience. One thing that this means for Schopenhauer is that life is a tough, troublesome, pessimistic experience that is full of pain. Again, this might remind you of some Eastern philosophy, like the Buddhist philosophers, claiming that the first noble truth given by the Buddha, he says that life fundamentally is suffering. Schopenhauer agrees with this and thinks he's found the reason why it's true. Because life is this endless process of desire and actualizing desire, seeking out desires, finding objects of desire, trying to achieve those. It means that we're in this cycle that goes from boredom to suffering. If we're not suffering, then life to us, Schopenhauer claims, seems to have no meaning at all. If there's not something we're striving for, something that we say we want to achieve, something that we're looking toward to make life better, more meaningful, or to make us happier, then according to Schopenhauer, our life becomes meaningless and suffering from the fact that we're not suffering. If we achieve the things that we want, because we work hard, we fight for the things that we decide to place value in, we achieve those things. Schopenhauer argues that that achievement can never bring happiness and peace and rest. Our life had purpose even though it was painful and a struggle when we were trying to achieve the things we didn't have. But as soon as we achieved what we have on Schopenhauer's view, because life is a matter of struggle, all things that exist have their essence because they're expressions of this primal desire that expresses through us. If we ourselves aren't suffering and striving and desiring, our existence and our purpose start to fade away, and that itself leads to suffering. This reminds me a bit of talking to elementary school kids who have been on summer break for a while. During school, all they'll tell you about is how much they want to be free of school and the pressure and the work and the boredom. And then you talk to them in summer break, and many of these kids say, I'm bored, I don't know what to do. We don't like the suffering of having to achieve. When we're not striving to achieve, we also lack purpose and suffer for that reason. That's Schopenhauer's claim. And so you can see why this creates what we might call the problem of success. Success itself causes us suffering because at least when we're striving for success, when we're having trouble reaching it, when we feel the conflict and we feel the sense of loss at not achieving what we want, we can hold the illusion that the thing we're seeking, the thing we desire, really would bring us happiness. On the other hand, when you achieve everything that you've wanted, on Schopenhauer's view, you realize that wanting was the only thing you wanted in the first place, that you are just a creature of want. Getting what you want makes you realize that there's no thing you want. Life is this endless striving. And for this reason, you can see why Schopenhauer is called a pessimistic philosopher. All of life is endless suffering, willing, and striving, and because of what makes us what we are, we can never truly be content. Schopenhauer takes this really seriously to the point where, at one point in his works, he actually advocates that human beings ought to stop reproducing more human beings, because the more we give into desire, and through that desire create more beings whose only way of being in the world is further desire, which is further suffering, which is further discontentment, which is an endless cycle of suffering. So Schopenhauer advocates that his own generation stop producing more because more people inevitably means more suffering.